Thank you for taking the time to join this video webinar. I'm Rich Whitworth, Content Director of The Medicine Maker, and I'm in conversation with Joe Principe, VP of Strategic Partnerships at Patheon, and Steve McCairns, Executive Director of UK Operations at Pacira, to find out how adaptable manufacturing models are paving a steady path into an unpredictable future. So Joe, we're in one of Patheon's many facilities. This one is in Swindon in the UK. Before we get talking about some of the challenges of choosing a manufacturing partner, can you just tell me a little bit about your experience? You have quite a unique view, I think, of the pharma world with your nearly 20 years of experience of constantly talking with big companies about their challenges.
Yeah, happy to. So I've been in the industry better part of 20 years, always been around the sales role. And I've seen the industry begin to change. The beginning of my tenure was associated with selling API, active ingredients, and transitioned to Patheon 5 years ago, which was a drug product company at the time.
Yeah.
As a result of that, I've got to see both sides of the industry in terms of
Sure.
the pharma service offerings, and the industry is definitely changing.
What are some of those sort of broader trends that you've seen over that time, and I guess what are some of the trends that are driving some of those high-level decisions?
Yeah, so what we see broadly across the industry, regardless of the size of the client that we're talking to, are some unique themes. Too many suppliers out there generally to manage, so we hear consistently from our customers that they want to reduce the number of suppliers they're dealing with. We see pressure on the industry from a pricing perspective because growth is coming from different segments of the market than it
Sure.
did historically. Emerging middle class all over the world is driving price pressure broadly across the industry. So we're beginning to see pharmaceutical companies thinking differently about supply chain as it relates to how to manage those realities.
Sure. And you mentioned there the pricing. I mean, that's a big issue across the industry, but it's also reached, I guess, into common knowledge, right? We're starting to hear comments from politicians, from the public sector about this need to drive costs down. What does that mean for the pharma industry? They're obviously looking for I guess more efficient routes to manufacture and to deliver those products. How are they dealing with that?
So I think from the angle that we look at the industry from, they're really looking at supply chain and evaluating whether the way that they've done supply chain historically is going to be suitable for the way they need to do supply chain going forward. In other words, can the pharmaceutical company and the supplier relationship generate value that it didn't generate historically? And the reasons that I think pharmaceutical companies are outsourcing is changing as time goes on, as the industry changes.
In what way specifically?
So the legacy of the industry really was that pharmaceutical companies typically went out and outsourced to offset constraints in internal capacity, to access technologies that perhaps they didn't have internally, didn't want to invest in. We're seeing that changing now. There's really a question about what role does manufacturing serve? Is it high value? We know it's high cost. Are those costs sustainable in a price pressure environment for pharmaceuticals? Yeah. So there's a rethink beginning in supply chain in pharmaceuticals.
Great. So we just talked about some of the sort of broad challenges that pharma faces, but I think there are some specific challenges associated with actually bringing a new product to market. Can you walk me through some of the challenges that pharma companies face?
Yeah, so I would characterize that by saying there are challenges all the way across the development of a product, from early development all the way through
Sure.
commercializing the product. As an example, we hear repeatedly from our customers who are developing products in the early development conversations, particularly around large molecule, which are consuming more and more of the pipeline of products, that they don't always have enough internal capacity to develop the portfolio of candidates that they actually have.
Right.
So they're looking for partners to help them bring those products on the market as quickly as possible. Speed in development is critical.
Sure.
So we've had a lot of conversations in that direction. Launching a product brings different challenges. One of which is no one's crystal ball is clear enough to tell them what the demand for that product is actually going to be. At the time that they're making decisions around capacity, that can be 2 to 3 years before the launch. So it's impossible to know what the competitive landscape will look like. It's impossible to know whether or not the insurance companies are going to pay for the product, whether it's going to go onto a government formulary. These are all challenges that make forecasting the actual demand very difficult, and as a result, making understanding how much capacity you're going to need more difficult.
Sure, and specifically in the manufacturing and supply chain, how are they sort of reacting to that challenge? They're having presumably longer conversations with companies like Patheon.
Yeah, so in the days past, they typically would just build more capacity than they needed to mitigate any potential upsides in demand forecasting. That's a relatively inefficient way to do it. What we've begun to see is that strategic contract manufacturers are being invited into the conversation a bit earlier. Can you provide solutions that give the pharmaceutical company alternative ways to commercialize, right? That are more flexible in terms of riding that demand wave as it actually unfolds.
So you touched upon the forecast, the crystal ball element, as you described it as,
right.
this forecasting challenge that I guess anyone in that field has faced. It's called a forecast for a reason. So can you just share with me some of the factors that need to be taken into account? I guess there are some factors that are more predictable.
Yeah.
What would you consider to be the ones that actually pharma generally feels like they've got a reasonably good handle on?
So I think they generally know their markets fairly well. What makes it difficult is that it's impossible to know what the competitive landscape looks like when the product is launched 2 or 3 years down the road. That's virtually impossible to know. Again, the payer attitudes towards the product. Will it be supported by the formularies, the insurance companies, the government payer systems, whatever the case may be? Those are challenges. Whether or not it'll get approved is obviously a risk and a challenge.
That's a pretty big one.
So it's just very difficult to get that right. And we joke, we say the only certainty we have about forecasts is it's wrong.
Same as the weather. Right?
Same as the weather.
Would you say that the industry has a tendency to overestimate because of the revenue consequences of the underestimation?
I would. So regardless of the type of pharmaceutical company, even if it's a virtual company that doesn't have manufacturing infrastructure, they tend to be conservative and overestimate the demand that they'll actually have. If you're building brick and mortar, that's a very expensive endeavor.
Sure, let's talk a little bit more about the worst case scenario there then, when someone's vastly overestimated or which may have come about because of a new competitor product into the market. What are the kind of knock-on effects there?
So constructing facilities is expensive, very expensive. We see that, and this is a rough number, internal capacity for pharmaceutical companies across the industry probably runs at about 50% utilization. So
right.
More or less half the capacity they build is unused. That's a lot of fixed costs to drag and basically task to the products that they sell. So they're always looking for more efficient ways to do that. But if you commit to build, you have committed to build.
Yeah. And
it's expensive, and you may or may not ultimately utilize that capacity. So it's a financial burden for the company to carry that cost.
Okay, so we just touched upon outsourcing coming to the fore, particularly to I guess, fight against these uncertain forecasts. Can you run me through a few scenarios where you would consider that it would be you've got two choices. You can insource or outsource. Can you run me through a few scenarios, where you would figure it was a safe bet to keep something in-house, or a situation where perhaps the company has got capacity or unused capacity, and then where outsourcing should be considered more carefully?
Yeah, so how I would describe that question is, if you look at a pharmaceutical company that has infrastructure, it's there. So there's a sunk cost mentality to the decisions that they take, right? We have the capacity, we may as well use it, right? Put as much product through it as we can to offset, obviously, the costs. That's one approach to it. Every company has its own set of priorities and their own attitudes toward risk, and we see that when we talk to head of manufacturing. We find out that the list of things they're concerned about is more or less the same, but the order in which they rank those things are very different. So control is key. Quality is key. So control, can I control my production? Can I control my supply? That's always important. There's often a tax strategy associated with where these assets are placed, which is part of the organizational efforts to derive value from supply chain. So there's a lot of considerations. Every company has their own unique view of what's most important.
Okay, so a company is facing a decision. Do we manufacture in-house or do we outsource? What is going to drive a company to the latter, to look to an outsourced solution?
So it could be accessing technology they don't have, it can be accessing capacity that they're constrained in, or it could be risk mitigation, business continuity, just to give them security in their supply chain.
And in your many conversations with people in those very positions, which one of those would you say is the one that really triggers that decision, or do you think it's company dependent?
It's really company dependent. Again, the list of things that concern pharmaceutical companies is fairly consistent. The order that they rank those, very individual.
Okay, so we've come to a point where a company has decided that they need to outsource for whatever reason, whether it was to mitigate risk or because they don't have the capacity. That's not the end of the story. More decisions need to be made. And we'll get to that in a little bit later, but given your sort of long history with the industry and working within this sort of relationship between pharmaceutical companies and providers, can you tell me a little bit about how that's changed or evolved over the years and what's driven some of that change? Yeah,
I think universally companies tell us that they're just dealing with too many suppliers. So they need to pare that down. It's too complicated to manage so many suppliers. And then second to that is, again, almost universally we hear that they want to take more of their external spend and focus it on fewer providers that have more broad-based capabilities.
And how have the contract manufacturers dealt with that demand? Presumably, there's a demand from the sector, and then you need to sort of realign. What shifts have you seen from the contract manufacturer side? Yeah,
so what we believe is happening in the industry is the supplier side of the industry is really ripe for consolidation. And we think that that's beginning. Patheon has gone through a number of acquisitions in the last couple of years to position us to be exactly that type of supplier. Broad base of capabilities, drug substance, drug product, can support a product all the way through the life cycle from development to commercial launch.
And how about the relationship? Because I think it's moving away from a sort of customer-supplier relationship from what I understand. And because the relationship is more involved and more complex, there's a stronger relationship between the two. Can you tell me a little bit about that? How Patheon now interacts with its customers, or probably a better word is partner.
Yeah, I think it is moving towards more of a partnership, and that's a term that's been largely overused in the industry for a long time. However, we do see that the conversation, at least with clients that behave more strategically and are willing to engage with their supply chain differently, is a shifting dialogue sort of away from the historic, here's what we'd like you to manufacture for us, to here's the problem we're trying to solve. What solutions can you bring to bear that are different than the way we've interacted in the past?
So we've covered a couple of quite interesting challenges that's facing the pharma industry, and clearly some of the outsourced providers are key to solving some of those challenges. You've obviously been in discussions with a number of companies over the years. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the discussions that you've had and what you plan to do about it? What solutions might be on offer?
First and foremost, we still maintain the traditional fee-for-service model because that will continue to be a large part of the industry. However, when we are problem solving and listening to the different challenges the industry has, those challenges sort of segregated themselves into a couple different offerings that we came up with. So the first is a dedicated facility. We heard many times from our clients that we want to shut down a part of our own network. We want to transfer those products over, but we want to maintain complete control. So we'd like our own facility within your network. And so we've built dedicated facilities for our clients. We'll continue to do that. We see a lot of interest in that offering. Second to that is basically a similar concept, slightly less capital. We could do basically a dedicated facility that can be shared by a few customers that have very similar demands. It's a more efficient way for them to access the capacity but not have as much of the capital burden that they would have building a dedicated facility for their own purpose. And as we move down the continuum, less capital would be to utilize our network as it exists. So we may have a company that comes to us and says, we want this much sterile capacity, and we'd like you to offer that to us. And we look across our network. We have sterile capacity in various locations across the globe, and we can assure them access to a certain amount of capacity. We call that a global network access model.
Yeah.
Lastly, from a facility standpoint, is our condo model. The condominium model is really a dedicated facility that's purpose-built for a very specialized technology or process that there's no market solution for currently. So the client would typically come with their own process equipment that's very unique and bespoke to that particular process.
Yeah.
And we would construct a facility for that within our own infrastructure. It's a much more efficient way for them to move forward as opposed to building their own brick and mortar somewhere.
So I mentioned earlier we're in Swindon at one of Patheon's facilities, and in fact we had a chance to tour around one of the condo style suites that you have here, which is Pacira's. Can you tell me a little bit about that example and why it's here in Swindon?
Yeah, of course. No, it's really an exciting one for us, and one of the early condos that we successfully put together in partnership with Pacira. So this opportunity classically fits what the condo model was designed to support. A very unique process technology. It's actually more than a product, it's a platform. So Pacira can actually launch ultimately multiple products within this platform. The industry didn't have a ready-made solution for what they were looking for. And it really nicely fit in based on relationship, and partnering with them. We were able to sit down together and talk about how this facility should come together. Again, our engineering expertise was supportive of the process. We do know how to build facilities.
Sure.
And so it's really been a great experience. It's great to see the facility up and running. But it really classically was a need that fit this condo model because it was almost an unmet need from a manufacturing standpoint.
Great. Just to sort of wrap up, before you said that one of the main comments from the pharma industry that there are too many suppliers. Mm-hmm. That's a challenge for Patheon. How is Patheon positioning itself for the future so they can be one of those providers?
Yeah, so we've focused really intently over the last 5-6 years on constructing the company really to be a supply chain solution provider. So we've brought pieces of technology into the company. We've acquired companies that have brought technology, that have brought capacity in certain geographies to build basically an end-to-end solution provider capable of delivering drug substance, drug product from early development all the way through commercialization. I think that more business will be funneled to companies that are capable of doing this because the scale makes sense and it's highly efficient. I think there'll be a lot of pressure in the industry on the smaller providers who are not getting their fair take because companies are directing more of their spend towards broadly capable companies.
Well, thanks very much for your time, Joe. It's been a
my pleasure.
Real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So Steve, we're here in Patheon's facility in Swindon. You're currently utilising one of the condo facilities here. Can you tell me a little bit about the product that you're manufacturing here and why that represents some fairly unique challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. The product that we manufacture here in Swindon is Exparel. It's a post-surgical analgesic product, and it's considered a breakthrough in that it offers sustained release for patients in a number of soft tissue and orthopedic areas. We consider it a breakthrough product because it helps us deal with the societal impacts of the opioid epidemic.
You know, I mentioned Pacira earlier to Joe, and he described it as a platform technology. Mm-hmm. Can you share with me a little bit of, not obviously all the details of that platform technology, but it gives a bit of an insight as to how that platform might be used down the line?
Absolutely. The Exparel product uses a multivesicular liposome format to introduce a readily available analgesic in the form of bupivacaine. And the multivesicular liposome format offers a way of sustained release of that particular product. So it's actually formed within the context of a matrix then, known as depot foam. Right. And depot foam could be used for a number of different formats and chemical entities, i.e. a substitute for bupivacaine could be introduced to the depot foam format.
Sure. And, you know, it's clear that it's a complex process, it's perhaps a unique process. Can you tell me why Patheon was chosen as the sort of manufacturer of choice?
Yes, there are a number of intellectual property challenges, as you might imagine, with proprietary technology such as depot foam and then Exparel as a product. It therefore requires a high degree of engineering acumen within an organisation. So not every CMO, could do this job. For Patheon, the engineering expertise that they have is significant, and that's been very important since the actual process is highly automated. Right. And would require that type of expertise to execute.
Fantastic. And you're part of this condominium model of their sort of flexible manufacturing. Can you describe a little bit about why that suits this particular product?
Yes, it's an important consideration for us in the respect that the condominium model actually has strategic implications for the business. We consider it a strategic partnership. Condominium model is very different to a normal CMO proposition in that we actually have a dedicated footprint at the facility and use shared services in that respect. This for a company like Pacira was the only proposition we could really consider, considering the intellectual property challenges that we have. And we really do see Patheon as leading the field in this particular value proposition.
Fantastic. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.